Well, since everyone is here and coming, I think there are more people, but we're going to hang with island time, right? Yeah. We're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'd like to begin with welcoming you all here today on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. We want to really thank you for coming out for Rethinking Racial Justice in the wake of Obama and the era of Trump. I hate saying that last part, but this is really an important conversation, and really do appreciate you taking your time on a wonderful Saturday afternoon at the Vineyard to participate in it with us. My name is Jocelyn Sargent. I'm the Executive Director of the Heinz Foundation. We are a small private foundation based in Boston, Massachusetts, and we focus on increasing economic, racial, and social justice and power within marginalized communities. And our focus has been particularly on Boston and Chelsea, Massachusetts, but as you know, there's no safe place in this country right now. I'm so honored and pleased to be able to be, in some small way, connected to this important event that the Scholars for Social Justice have pulled together. In these times, we all know democracy is in trouble, and these scholars have brought, and they're not just scholars, they're activists, they're mothers, they're many, many things. And I'm not supposed to talk about all the things that they are, so I'm going to keep going. But it's important that these networks come together to produce strategies and energy around this very important moment that we're facing. So I am going to turn it over in just a second. I just wanted to do a brief introduction of the lead conveners from Scholars for Social Justice. They are Barbara Ransby and Kathy Cohen. Barbara Ransby is a professor of history and gender and women's studies and African American studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. She's also the author of numerous books, including one of my favorites, the one on Ella Baker and the Black Freedom Movement. And she is, if you didn't catch her op-ed piece on Thursday in the New York Times, please do. It's a really important piece about, I think, about the future of democracy. It's titled The Future of the Democratic Party, but it speaks to the leadership of women of color in Congress and how that, is really how we need to be looking at democracy. And thinking about this country's leadership in the future. And also, Kathy Cohen, who is the last person I'm going to introduce because I'm turning over to her. She is, I just have to say, she's a good friend. She's just like a good soul. I've not met many people on this earth that represent that as well as Kathy does. But she's a political scientist, an author, a feminist, a social activist whose work focuses on African American experience in politics, and she looks at intersectionality and intersectionality. And just the way that Black people live their lives. So I think this is really important perspectives that these scholars bring to us. She's a professor of political science at the University of Chicago and the author of several pieces, including Democracy Remix. I'm not going to talk much about it. I'm just going to turn it over to Kathy right now because we have a lot to cover today. Thank you all again for coming out. Thank you. Do we need this? Because I don't think it's working, right?
There we go. Yes. Let there be light, let there be sound. Okay. As Jocelyn noted, I am Kathy Cohen, one of the co-founders of Scholars for Social Justice. I want to just start by really reiterating what Jocelyn said. Thank you all for being here on a beautiful Saturday. I know there's beauty outside. I guarantee there will be a deepness of thought, interrogation, discussion and reimagining of freedom, all the kind of different types of beauty that we would want to be engaged in if we were inside. So this is going to be exciting for us. With Barbara Ransby and a group of nearly 20 members, we've been working since 2017, including Beverly Guy-Shefto, Beth Ritchie, and others in the room, to build a new organization called Scholars for Social Justice. As an organization, we believe that we are clearly living in dangerous times with the election of Donald Trump and the empowerment of a set of rabidly right-wing and racist forces manifesting through white supremacy, directly targeting the rights, status, and lives of folks of color, of those who are Muslim, of women, of immigrants, of LGBTQIA communities, the poor, indigenous, disabled, and all those actually who've been forced to live on the margins of the country. In such an environment, all those who believe in social justice must join together in the fight against forces who would try to advance hate and a white supremacist political agenda. And it was really with that urgency of kind of agenda that we decided to come together to build Scholars for Social Justice. Scholars for Social Justice is a political formation. And what I mean by that is it's not attached to any university. It's not necessarily quote unquote academics. It's those who are engaged in the work of interrogation, of partnership with communities and communities of color and folks who are vulnerable, who are kind of seeking to reimagine and rethink what freedom and liberation looks like. That is the work of Scholars for Social Justice. Scholars for Social Justice was also built to work in partnership with orgs that are doing work in the grassroots and on the ground. In particular, we want to open up spaces where in fact we can provide political education and spaces for discourse so we can think about what liberation looks like and how in fact we move forward. So that is in fact what we're trying to do today. We say in the wake of Obama and in the era of Trump to provide some context, but this does not have to be a discussion only about the 2020 election. It undoubtedly will involve some discussion of the election, but of course we have to be thinking about the election as a place to build for a kind of broader sense of what liberation is going to look like for our people. All right, I'm going to end with a quote from the beloved Toni Morrison. I heard that, yes. In her 2019 book, The Source of Self-Regard, Selected Essays, Speeches, and Meditations, she writes, and I quote, "Our past is bleak, our future dim, but I am not reasonable. A reasonable man adjusts to his environment. An unreasonable man does not. All progress, therefore, depends on the unreasonable man. I prefer not to adjust to my environment. I refuse the prison of I and choose the open spaces of we." End quote. So over the next 2 days, I hope we can be unreasonable, demanding and imagining new ways of being in an open space of we, doing that, of course, together. So again, thank you so much for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Barbara Ransby.
And after you read from Toni Morrison, I just need to sit down. She's been very, very much in our thoughts and our hearts, because not only did she talk about people struggling and resisting, but she also talked about finding joy, loving ourselves, loving each other, and that was a real gift. So I'm going to be very, very brief. First of all, again, as everyone said, thanks for giving. I'm looking at this beautiful water out and blue sky out the back. And so thanks for coming for this important conversation. This feels like a small room. It is a small room. It's an intimate conversation. People should also note that this is being live streamed. There will be copies of the conversation later. And I'm just really honored that our first panel is a panel of activists and organizers who have left the sort of front lines of the struggle for racial justice to come and have a conversation with us this weekend. So I'm very grateful for them. Hopefully we can have some even more intimate conversations, but I'm especially happy that they're here. I want to acknowledge one of the personal gifts of this program too is to be able to work with my dear friend, the brilliant Kathy Cohen, who has thanked everyone else, but I want to also thank her for her precision and passion in doing this work and pushing us to hone and frame this program to what it has become. And also to acknowledge Jocelyn Sargent, our dear friend at the Hyams Foundation, for seeing the need for having this kind of conversation, right? It could have been someplace else, it could have been a different topic, but to see the importance of having activists and to talk about breaking out of silos in this really important moment, we really, pay tribute to your leadership, Jocelyn. So I'm asked to just for a minute say why this conversation, why now, and perhaps most importantly, why here? And I think in some ways the reason for this conversation now should be obvious to all of us. We have I'm not going to mince words, we have a malicious, reckless, racist, misogynist person in the White House that is doing a lot of damage to our people and to our communities. If we're not clear about that, we should get clear about it. So what more urgent calling than to take academics, artists, writers, activists, organizers, in a same conversation about how we can move to a different place. I think there's so much at stake, there's so much in jeopardy. We understand elections are important. I know some people this morning were with Stacey Abrams, one of the bright lights in terms of progressive electoral politics. But this is not just about elections, right? We're not going to elect our way to freedom. And so it is also about organizing, it's about activism, it's about being in the streets. Protest is never old. People need to make their voices heard, and we need to do that in a very serious way. So why here? Why here in this place as we, look out at a very, very privileged space, very rarefied space in some ways? Well, let me say this, and I'm not the historian of Martha's Vineyard, although I am a historian. I want to also acknowledge Salam Makuria, who did a film on African Americans on Martha's Vineyard. I would be very, very remiss if I did not acknowledge Ms. Dorothy Burnham, who is on the third, fourth row there, 100 and some years old, who has been coming to the vineyard many, many decades, and really represents the spirit of what we want to capture in this event, because it is a culture of resistance and refuge. It is a culture of collaboration and debate where people like Dorothy Burnham and Dorothy West, right, were people who represented a certain kind of Black community on Martha's Vineyard in Oak Bluffs. And Edgartown, no offense to anybody, but Edgartown, where we are now, is not the heart of Martha's Vineyard. Oak Bluffs is the heart of Martha's Vineyard. And there you will find all kinds of conversations, debates, discussions, passionate exchanges about what should happen. And so what we see this as is in some ways democratizing some of those conversations, opening them up, bringing people here whose work is really making a difference every day, but finding a little bit of a secluded and quiet space to have important conversations about what really are very volatile and gut-wrenching issues. And so we thank you all for being here. And this very first panel is, as I said, very special. It is moderated by Asha Ransby-Sporn, who is an organizer, the director of organizing for Black Youth Project 100, who started off her career organizing students against mass incarceration at Columbia, and has been fighting and learning and growing ever since. And she will introduce the rest of the panel, but I have to say, having Movement for Black Lives and the majority represented, having Dream Defenders, the young people in Florida who did so much organizing around Trayvon Martin and continued into this moment, and they'll talk about that a little bit more. Later we'll have Mary Hooks from Song, one of my very favorite organizers in the whole world, on a panel and conversation. Others too, I'm not mentioning everyone. Dr. Beverly Guy-Sheftall is here, who is, of course, a powerhouse in Black feminist thought. Beth Ritchie, similarly. So please come tomorrow as well as today. Kathy Cohen is going to start off the program tomorrow with a really powerful panel on data, the politics of liberation, right? Data for liberation.
Data.
So, so who's voting and why? What do people think? How do we talk about a mass movement? How do we talk about fundamental change without looking at the numbers? And I'm a historian, so I don't do that so well, but I have friends who do, and Kathy's one of them. So please come for that panel tomorrow morning. And I'm going to now turn it over to Asha. Right?
Sergio.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Did I not acknowledge Sergio on the show? I thought you did. I'm sorry. I acknowledge Jocelyn Sargent. I did not acknowledge her amazing team, Shani and Sergio, who many people have gotten emails from. Heavy lifting for the logistics, and also the program is being live streamed by Terry.
Jordy.
We're very good
I'm sorry.
friends.
Yes. I was supposed to do this, and you notice I put my notes down, which is always a mistake. So I want to thank Terry Smith, Jordy Davies, who traveled from Chicago to kind of help us pull all this together, including the live streaming. I mean, we're all here because so many people have done such great things. Regina Freer, Tracy Matthews will also be on the agenda tomorrow. So it's just a great gathering. And enough with the intro. Let's get it started. Yeah.
Yep. So come on up, our first group, and thank you.
And then,
If anyone wants, there's coffee and tea to the left over there.
Thank you for that, introduction. So we can go ahead and get started. My name is Asha. I'm the National Organizing Chair for BYP 100. And this panel is called Organizing for and Beyond 2020. So we will talk a little bit about elections as a benchmark, as terrain, but also hopefully go beyond that to talk about kind of, where we're at, where we're going. And so with that, I'm gonna pass it to Mary. And each of you can just take about a few minutes to introduce yourself, talk about your work, and a little bit about the political moment that we're in.
Excellent.
well, hello, friends.
Hello, Mary.
How y'all doing? Good. Oh, little mo face right there. Hey, look, I can see you people. But I'm Mary Hooks, and I have the blessing of being an organizer and co-director with Southerners on New Ground. SONG is a 26-year-old political home for LGBTQ Southerners that are organizing across race, class, gender, all the things, seeking liberation. And just feel very honored to be here. Thank you everyone for extending the invitation. Naming the political moment. Well, one, let me just say this. I've been on sabbatical for like 2 months. However, but I have, certainly kept my hand on the pulse of what is happening. I mean, it's in our bones. And I think one of the things that we know for sure is that none of this feels like a surprise. This is just, real talk. It's a well manifested plan, the Southern strategy. Damn it, it worked. It worked, y'all. And that is what we're seeing. I don't think we've seen this, type of consolidated power of the right and all the different fractions of the right consolidate this much power nationally, and I would even say internationally, given what I've been seeing. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do. I think we have a lot of work to do, but I think we also have to grapple with what it means for our folk who are struggling on a daily basis and just living everyday, regular, schmegular lives and not understanding necessarily the magnitude of what we're up against. And what is our work as, grassroots organizers, real talk, to, do work that is actually worth the sacrifices and the risks that our people are willing to take, worth our people's courage and their bravery in order to advance a social justice agenda that doesn't leave anybody behind. I think that we are also have to be very clear about not what we're against, of course, and so we're clear. And I would say my comrades will confirm that we certainly are against capitalism. We believe that we cannot get any sort of racial justice if capitalism is left standing. And I don't care what black business owner would tell you, if we just get more black businesses, that is going to get black people free. And we can debate that all night as long as we got some brown liquor. I will go the rounds with you that is not going to get us free. And we also have to be clear that we have to dismantle patriarchy in all of its many forms. It is a system. It's not just behaviors. It is a system. I think it also is in our culture. It shows up in many, many ways. And we have to be diligent
about unearthing that and all the many ways in which it shows up, even in the lives of women and queer and trans people and all of us who walk this earth. And somebody told me one time, patriarchy is one of the oldest forms of oppression. And so we have to be rigorous in the way in which we take it down. But in all of those things, I think it's important that we're clear about what we're for. And I know for Song and for us, we are for the dignity of all people. We are for an economic system that doesn't profit. One profits off of the suffering of the many, and that that people's labor is honored and people can do work that provides purpose and people love what they do and can contribute meaningfully to the communities in which they live in. And we also, want an economic system that doesn't just benefit folk in this settler colony, but we also have to be thinking internationally. We can win nothing in these states that is going to impact and hurt, particularly Africans across the diaspora. Like, that ain't going to work. And we don't want to be contributing to the lifelong suffering our people have had to engage and endure for hundreds and hundreds of years. Enough of that already. But anyway, I could go on, and I'm interested in hearing what my comrades will say, but I just want to lay that out. And I just also want to name, as an LGBTQ organization who desperately believes in the liberation of all people, I would be remiss not to name that part of our liberation includes sexual liberation, y'all. That has to be a part of it. If our desires and our longings are not in the forefront, not just our anger, but our longings and our desires also have to be made manifest in the dreams and what we aspire to. So I'll leave that there and pass it to my comrade.
Okay, cool. My name is Rachel, and I am an organizer with the Dream Defenders. Thank you so much for having us. Really grateful for this conversation. I'm going to share a little bit about kind of Dream Defenders' trajectory. We've been around for 7 years, and kind of how we've arrived to where we are today as an organization and how we're thinking about this current moment. So Dream Defenders was founded after the killing of Trayvon Martin, and young people came together across Florida campuses to really demand justice in his murder. And a year later, when George Zimmerman was acquitted, we occupied the Florida Capitol for 31 days and 30 nights, demanding a repeal of Stand Your Ground, which was the law that George Zimmerman was acquitted on, and basically a passing of a suite of legislation that we called Trayvon's Law, which was a suite of legislation to end the criminalization of Black youth. And, through this experience of occupying the Capitol, celebrities came and visited us. We had our Twitter followers ballooned in days. We had news cameras that were following us. But at the end of the 31 days, we didn't win anything. And I think this experience very early in the organization really grounded us, because despite the visibility and the popularity we had, we didn't have any power. And, we were in the halls of the Capitol where, Florida's been under trifecta Republican control for the past 20 years. Our Democratic Party is one of the most conservative, the most moderate in the country, and with the least funding. The Koch brothers pour more money into Florida than anywhere else. They run education programs and campus organizations across Florida's universities, trying to organize the minds of young people. We have the most successful NRA lobbyists in the country. We have more private prison dollars that go to our politicians than anywhere else in the country. So all of this, we realized we just didn't have power. And that we really needed a long-term plan for building power. And then basically a year after we occupied the Capitol, when Mike Brown was killed and we saw people in Ferguson rise up for 3 months, and then, after months of sustained daily organizing, Darren Wilson get off under a Democratic governor and a Democratic president. It just became really clear to us, once again, it was another reminder of, we need a plan. And so we made a really unconventional decision and basically decided to take a break as an organization, take a step back, and really figure out what our plan was going to be. So we got off social media. One of our observations was that, I don't know how many of y'all are on Facebook, but those algorithms, they make you think that like everybody in the world is talking about a world without prisons and a world without police, when really it's just your friends. And we basically did a listening project in communities across Florida to like see where people were at. And overwhelmingly, like we heard people say like young people are the problem, like idle youth. We got to do something with these young people, and that police and prisons, like we need safety, and people couldn't imagine safety beyond more police and more prisons. And so to see the way that like our people had been kind of internalized this like conservative right-wing propaganda was a real wake-up call to us that we needed to do some like deep organizing in our communities to shift that. And so a couple of things came out of our reflection process. One, we brought our membership together. We have members on campuses, in communities, and we also have members inside a prison in Florida. And we put together a political vision that we called the Freedom Papers. And this is our long-term vision for what we're fighting for. This is our North Star. And we use this as an organizing tool as we work on particular campaigns to also make it clear the long-term vision that we're fighting for. And then we also got together with 7 other organizations in Florida to basically go into a deep alignment process to figure out like a long-term plan for building independent political power in Florida. And that group is basically working on building building power across 3 different fronts. One around cultural and narrative power. How do we make our vision the common sense in our communities and not the conservative vision the common sense in our communities? How do we build a robust and powerful movement outside the state that can push against the state? And then how do we build an electoral plan to actually get our people into office and to build political power inside the state? And coming together in a really visible way because in the face of Trump inciting so much racism and white nationalism, it's very important for the public, and especially young white people who are getting organized into this terribly racist nationalist vision, for them to see an alliance of people of color and young white people coming together in the spirit of, the Rainbow Coalition, to see us fighting together for a new social and economic vision, and that vision is actually possible.
Hello? Great. Hi.
Hi.
So I'll do a bit of an intro of who I am and then go into at least some of where I'm at in terms of the assessment of the current moment that we're in. I also just want to start by saying thank you to Scholars for Social Justice and Barbara and Kathy and others. Also, it's very, for me, humbling and beautiful to share space with folks who I've actually been to work with, comrades. So very grateful for that. So my name is Tenjiwe Tamika Nakaris. I co-founded a project, an organization called Blackbird with my partner in crime and co-founder Maurice Mitchell, the new National Director of the Working Families Party. And we founded Blackbird in 2014 in the midst of our assessment, the 3 of us uprisings happening within Black communities across the country, because we thought that there was a fundamental question we all had to hold, which is what does this moment mean in the legacy and the history of Black liberation, Black rebellion, and how do we be in a position to support our people and then take our learnings and be vulnerable enough to interrogate our mistakes and our challenges, and then think about what does it mean to build movement over time. And so a lot of my work has been in that particular home, Blackbird, which included other things, communications, rapid response, and then movement building. But I'm also a part of other political formations. One is the Movement for Black Lives, which is essentially a space in which Black organizations across the country pose a question to ourselves and everyone else, which is what is possible for us to do together that would be otherwise impossible to do alone? And what does it mean to actually build movement? And then I won't go too deep into other areas of my work, but the 2 things I just want to name is I'm also part of other formations with Barbara and others that are thinking about posing a similar question that we did in building M4BL to other movements and other organizations and other sectors and communities, which is how do we build sort of across movements in a way in which we can also think about what is possible for us to do together, whether you're in indigenous rights, immigrant rights, environmental justice, or Black movement. And then a lot of my work is in the international arena, which I won't get too deep into. Cool, so my assessment of the current moment. I feel like amidst everything, the most fundamental questions of our time is how did we get here? Do we have a shared understanding of what is the here? And then what can we understand about this moment to begin to forecast the possibilities for the decades to come? And so I grapple with these questions all the time and do not have answers to it. But the things I think about, obviously, about like how the hell did we get here? And other people will say that they could have predicted this, but and we hear it all many times. This is the product of years and decades of neoliberal policies and practices that have hurt our communities, hurt the earth, hurt the planet over and over again. But simultaneously, we've also seen rising popular dissatisfaction with what people are going through on an everyday basis. The challenge is that the most organized will capture sort of that dissatisfaction if the left is not organized enough to do it, for us to do it. And then I think we also are at this moment, because it's a convergence of, I think Mo also, and other people articulate this way, the convergence of various different crises all happening at once. Whether it's the crisis of climate, the crisis of forced migration, the crisis of what's happening to communities economically, extraction. And I also must say that we can't be global north centric. That's also a problem. People around the world have been dealing with various different crises all the time, and there are lessons and learnings in that for us. But there was a convergence happening, and I think in the midst of that there was some fundamental disagreements amongst the ruling class, and I think we've all seen them played out. We can watch them play out throughout history, but I think we see them played out recently. And so and then I'll close because I know I'm going long as hell. I need a timer from myself. I think that what we're seeing is a couple of different things. The convergence of these different crises. We're seeing a disagreement play out in the public arena. I don't think we always have our pulse on the exact disagreements, which hopefully I can get into a little bit later. And I think this moment is telling us is what I always think about, especially when I travel. It's like the tightening of the grip moment, which usually follows like economic upheaval, as well as like the rise of social popular movements. And I think we're in the midst of the tightening of the grip. So what we see is a continuation of things that always existed, and I think we need to be mindful of that. So this thing has always been here. We see an escalation of things in this moment, but there's also things that are new. And I think that's what we need to pay some really close attention to. What are the new ways in which the tightening of the grip is happening? Because I think that'll be able to help us understand what to do in the years to come. What does this mean for the road forward? And then I'll be quiet. I think on the one hand, I think what we can see is there's a growing appetite for something fundamentally different amongst people that are not just us. And I think that is an opportunity. I think if we are not prepared for that opportunity, it can work against us. So the bad of it is that the far right in particular are also experimenting with that growing appetite. But I still think that there's possibilities and opportunities that we can take advantage of.
Thank you all. Thank you all for that framing of the political moment and getting us a little bit about your work. Okay, thank you. So before the next question, I just want to bring a little bit of some of the work that I know that you all lead into this space to frame it. So Mary, you are the brainchild behind the incredibly inspiring Mama's Day bailouts efforts that we see. And a leader in the broader fight, right, to end money bail and pretrial detention. There's also a very powerful video of you chanting, they think it's a game, they think it's a joke, demanding counter your vote in the governor's race in Georgia last year that Stacey Abrams, who was mentioned earlier, ran in. Rachel, you mentioned the Freedom Papers that Dream Defenders published, which in addition to the beautiful handout has a very inspiring video attached to it that moved me a lot. And Dream Defenders also endorsed Andrew Gillum, who I know, there was some overlap in vision and not entirely the same politics organizationally. And then you all were also a part of the fight for the ballot initiative, the Amendment 4, which restored voting rights to millions of people in Florida last year, which is an incredible victory. Millions of formerly incarcerated folks with felony convictions. And then Tenjiwe, in addition to other folks on the panel in the room, actually, has been one of the brilliant facilitators and strategists of the movement for Black Lives Space, where there is a 5-year strategy that includes an electoral strategy, but then goes beyond that. So the question is, how do you all understand in this specific political moment the relationship between movement building and elections? And yeah, I would just ask all of you to talk a little bit about both the possibilities and then the threats or pitfalls in them.
Okay. So I guess movement building and elections. So I think, elections are not going to save us. And for better or for worse, they are a period when most people in this country see as like what politics is. Like people see elections as the political process. And so I think elections, like if we sit them out, we actually lose an opportunity to engage, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people who are like thinking about politics. And there's that opening there. And I think there's a way to do electoral politics that's very transactional, like telling people voting will save them, or sending, knocking on people's doors for 6 months leading up to the election and then not following up, talking to them very narrowly about the election without pulling them into the broader movement. And actually, in Florida, that was one of the reasons why we decided to start that alignment process with the other organizations, because with Florida being a swing state, like such an important state electorally, basically what we see is like on a national level, millions of dollars flow into Florida on the election. Then all of the local groups are like fighting to get a piece of that pie. Most of the money ends up going to these big national organizations who parachute in on the election and then leave the day after. And so starting this alignment process was really around being able to organize the money and ensure that the resources that were coming into the state were actually going towards a long-term movement building process. And so, I think that's really how we think about elections. How do we use them to grow our organizations? We are laser focused right now on how do we use this election to get more young Black people excited about our vision, about the Freedom Papers. Some of how that looked in 2018 was that, groups on the ground in Florida worked for years under the leadership of formerly incarcerated people to get Amendment 4 on the ballot, which was around repealing this Jim Crow era law that didn't allow people with felonies to be able to vote. So 1 in 4 Black people, 1 in 2 Black men could not vote in the state of Florida because of this law. And so we worked to get it on the ballot, and then as we were talking to people about Amendment 4, we were also like organizing them into a larger vision and trying to pull them into our organizations. The other way that sort of showed up in 2018, like how we used the Freedom Papers in this larger vision and movement building strategy, was around when the Parkland shooting happened. We saw young people getting like politicized in really rapid amounts, and not just white kids from the suburbs. Like we were helping Black students organize walkouts with like hundreds of their peers. But most of the young people, because they're young, had like a very narrow kind of political analysis around what the problem was. Like we're really just thinking about gun violence, gun violence, gun violence. And so we used the Freedom Papers, held convenings and trainings and community town halls to help young people understand gun violence as a jumping off point to understand all the ways the system is violent and to pull them into our organizing work around Amendment 4. And then I think the last thing is we also used it as an advocacy tool to actually like shift the determinants of the debate around the election. So we held a gubernatorial town hall based on the Freedom Papers, where we forced candidates to respond to our vision. And one of the things that came out of that town hall was that we saw Andrew Gillum as putting forth the most progressive vision we had seen from a gubernatorial candidate in Florida in a very long time, maybe ever. He would have not only been our first black governor, but he was also the only non-millionaire in the race. He was talking about radical ideas like abolishing ICE, raising teacher salaries to $50,000, taxing corporations. And we had never thought about endorsing a candidate before, but it became very clear that there was an opportunity with Andrew Gillum. And that, we build power as organizations to make tough decisions, and that people were looking at us, young people, to understand the moment, and that we didn't want to shirk leadership. We actually wanted to lean into providing people some political direction. So we brought the idea of endorsing to our membership, and there was a lot of debate. And overall, people ended up voting to endorse him, but we decided to make what we called a conditional endorsement. So we basically put out a statement around why we were endorsing him. And we really wanted to make it clear, tell no lies, claim no easy victories, that Andrew Gillum was not about electing a savior or, we're going to elect him and then we're going to sit out. That Andrew Gillum was our best opponent. That in choosing who we were going to endorse, we were choosing our best opponent, who the day after the election we wanted to best go up against. We literally had a plan. We really thought he was going to win, but we had a plan to literally occupy his office the day after the election, inspired by some organizers in Brazil. But Andrew Gillum ended up losing, but he won the primary. Really high primary turnout, and then he lost the election by 30,000 votes. And one of the things, really dangerous narratives that's come out from the mainstream Democratic establishment in Florida since he lost is that he lost because his ideas were too radical, and that we need to move to the middle. And within days of Joe Biden announcing his candidacy, literally the Florida Democratic Party, nobody asked, came out and was like, we're endorsing Joe Biden, whatever, out of nowhere. I think because they have a long-term stake in this narrative that we've got to keep moving to the middle. So one of the reasons that we really feel it's important for us to endorse in the primary is to push back against that narrative and to say that young people in Florida turned out to vote for Andrew Gillum precisely because of his left vision. And that it was the closest margin that we had in a governor's race in a long time. So this false conclusion that he lost because his ideas were radical is just a total lie. And so, we're really excited to endorse, not because of the candidate necessarily, but because, again, we want to reinforce this idea that people want a new social and economic vision for the future and are sick of this neoliberal middle of the road BS.
Okay. I have a few thoughts. I think for song, I think it was maybe a few years ago, we did a little campaign in relationship to I think this is when Trump was first going up, and we knew we hadn't figured out what do we want to be doing with electoral stuff. We were we gotta do something, and we organized a yard sign campaign. Do they have any yard sign? We have a little yard sign campaign, and we're let's just see what we can do to continue to test our muscle on how we coordinate, shared actions across the region inside of our membership. Let's just try it. And we went through a process, folks agreed on messaging, and we put out, I think our goal was to distribute maybe 5,000 yard signs that said Dream, Vote, Organize, our lives depend on it. And it was really cool. And we were okay, we can move some, that was us trying to figure out how we move some things in terms of scale-wise and exercise, decision making and all the things that come into taking on a little mini project like that. And so over the years we've, talked about our electoral work as experiment, which is what I feel we are often inside of a song talking about. We're just gonna experiment and try some shit, because we don't have, the silver bullet, we have no business saying let's not try nothing when so much is at stake. You got a good idea? Let's do it, And so we did an electoral experiment last year. We actually, really started to test what does it look like for our folks to engage in some just basic civic engagement, get out the vote efforts, particularly as related to local candidates. One of the things that we continue to grapple with is how do we know that the national election is has everybody's ear, And we're like, y'all, but what they doing locally, and the folk who get the mayors and the DAs and et cetera, you know, they are coming for our lives, and we also have to, you know, be just as diligent about those races. And so we, you know, we're able to do some work, and one of the convenings that we do every year is one of our Out South convenings, where we bring different organizations together to get a read and scan of what's happening in the South, you know, see where we're aligned, do a little struggle training, etc. But we said we also wanted to maximize that opportunity to say, hey, if we got all of us in a space together, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be doing work that impacts locally, you know, the work that we're doing. And so we're able to do a mass canvas in coalition with some of the folks that were, you know, supporting a really good candidate. And part of that was also because we were moving a civilian oversight board, and it had gotten a referendum. And so, you know, it was exciting to see how, you know, folks were just selfishly moving, just like, well, that actually has nothing to do with us. I work here and in Nashville. But I think there's a need for us to, you know, we know all too much that the right continues to share strategies, policies, etc. across state lines, across the South, like, hey, test this out. And so for us to be able to, you know, create opportunities where we can do shared work together, knowing that it can have implications for how we, you know, are able to inspire each other across state lines to say, hey, this is what we tried here, y'all try it over there, see if it works. And that's one example. But over the years, I think we have continued to, like, if we may not have the winning strategy, but we got some boots. And so if there's an opportunity like to build with our comrades like Mijente, who a few years ago was engaged in the Basta Arpaio campaign, and many people know about Sheriff Arpaio, who is ridiculous, horrible, just all around ridiculous dude, right? And we were able to mobilize forces, some of our forces. We don't have a base in Arizona, like that ain't where we organize, but we saw a critical need, and there was an opportunity for us to do movement building, to do collective work, and for our folks to get trained up and skilled up. And so we're able to mobilize some of our folks. You know, I think that weekend, I can't remember. Anyway, there was a lot of doors that were knocked and a lot of efforts to make sure that he didn't get back into office. And I think what was really spectacular about that is because this is also in a time where, you know, for our folks who are queer and trans folk, you know, we're like trying to like build the muscle to organize across communities, you know what I mean? And to say, we don't necessarily have to, you know, we have the courage and the rigor to go talk to strangers, to go get on the doors, to do, you know, those things that don't feel as, you know, comfortable to our people. And I think it opened up possibilities, because ended up winning that campaign. It livened up our folk in the South. They're like, yes, anything electoral, we want in. And oftentimes, you know, infrastructurally, we were behind what our folks was saying they wanted to do in terms of work. So we had to grapple with like, hey, we probably better get a C4 for political cover if nothing else, you know, because folks is like, we finna take it to the top. And we're like, whoa, some things we probably shouldn't be saying. And so, you know, I think that was also a learning curve that we're also engaged in, but lessons to organizations like the Workers' Families Party, who has been, you know, really instrumental in helping us figure it all out and be able to level up the way we think about electoral work, but then also create an invitation for us to continue to do more work, and you know, that I think exceeds just like the electoral cycle. I mean, a lot of I think what building relationships with different organizations is not necessarily because we're like, it's electoral, all hands on deck, but there's also some deep personal relationships and political relationships. We've done work together. There's been political trust that has been built through time. And so I think that is what we're also seeing, the manifestation of how movement building is inspired, you know, through an electoral process, because we're also able to like share resources and share infrastructure and lessons and like, hey, y'all need 20 people to come? Cool, we got you. We're gonna send our people. You know, and I think with that sort of ability to move resources, not just for our own individual campaigns, but we see as broader implications, you know, with the Dream being able to move like they moved in Florida, like that was critical to what and how folk across the South saw electoral opportunity. People like, yes, we can totally throw down, you know? And so I think that we have to be able to get up under work that is going to outlast the candidate. Real talk. It's going to outlast the candidate. It's going to inspire and build new leaders. It's going to allow us to bring about new tools that we hadn't used before. And I think that the way in which grassroots, everyday people are able to engage in electoral work, when we think about arts and think about culture, how we use big puppets and just bring the magic of us into what can oftentimes be a very stale electoral process. I think it's also very invigorating in terms of awakening the political imagination of what we say and how we articulate the political vision that we speak of. And all of those things are critical. And it happens when we are in relationship with each other that isn't just transactional and exceeds an electoral cycle.
I don't have too much to add. I think there are 3 points that come to mind for me. I say that and then I speak for like 10 minutes. So what I really need to do is time myself whenever I say that. So I think about 3 things. One, it's why I think about why movements need to have. When I think about the relationship, why social movements need to have an analysis around the electoral arena. The second piece, I'm just going to say long term. I think what movements need to consider long term, and then in the short term around 2020. The first thing I'll just say real quick, I think it's a political failure for progressive left forces not to have an analysis around how the electoral arena affects the landscape, even if your assessment is that you don't have an added value or a unique contribution. To not have an assessment analysis is a political failure. I didn't quite get that completely until 2016. As a young left organizer who had a number of different opinions, I didn't quite get that. So that's the first thing. The second piece is I think that there are other fundamental political questions for us to tackle with as we move into the urgency of 2020. And I think some of it is around the fact that we need a meta strategy, we need a multi-decade strategy. And the right is winning for a number of different reasons, obviously resources, etc. But there is multi-decade strategy in place where there is some shared agreement. The left needs a multi-decade meta strategy that would include a number of things. One, the left needs a new political articulation of some kind, and the only way we get there is if we build it collectively. The other piece is that we are required in this moment to move from a position of always demanding influence to moving our people to understand that our central purpose is collective control. And part of that is that we need to build independent political power. So these are things that I feel like is essential for us as if we 2020 is extremely important, but it's essential for us to have that kind of analysis. Now, in terms of 2020, it's very clear we need to prevent a second term. For me, there's no argument. Of course, this needs to do whatever to do that. But I also think there are other opportunities for us as well. One is around political literacy. Our people are being undermined without not knowing the ways in which the system works against them. So how is this an opportunity to increase political literacy? And I think this is also a moment where we can talk about democracy, where we can talk about we also have a moral responsibility as people in the center of the eye, in the what do you call it? The belly of the
Eye of the storm.
Eye of the storm, belly
Belly
of
of
the
the
beast. To publicly question what democracy it really is in the United States. I think we have a moral responsibility as people that live here to say that Barbara talks about all the time, bourgeois democracy to what we see now. But I think there's an opportunity and we have to do that. And I think the last piece before I end it is electoral work gives us an opportunity to do a couple of different things. One, to mitigate harm. Harm mitigation is here. As a young organizer, I was always the hell with the lesser of two evils. That is a flawed assessment and analysis. And we need, it's something that's a young black radical that I think about, that I carried on, that lesser of two evil, that shit matters. Lesser of two evil does matter, actually.
Yeah.
And then, so harm mitigation. And then the last piece, I think, the comrades already said it, I look at electoral work as tactical experiments. And so are there particular openings, particularly at the local level, where we can create enough room to do different kinds of experimentation, especially around alternatives, and that having people in local offices might be able to help us do that.
Yeah, great.
Thanks, Tenju. I think that segued well into our next question, which, organizers, movement builders, we, I think, spend a lot of time figuring out what the terrain is, right? What's possible within this? Where's our target on a map of if they're with us or against us, and how much power they have, and all of that. And so, yeah, I think the question is just kind of, do you feel like we were prepared for the 2016? We, as in, whether it's the movement for Black Lives or the movement more broadly, we're prepared for the 2016 election and outcome. And then the follow-up that I'll add on, right, is what are the lessons that we learned around what it can and should and needs to look like for us to be prepared for major shifts in that political terrain. Yes.
I'll be quick. I mean, you know, this is like a debate. This is a question we often debate because what people say, I knew it was coming, because somebody else was like, I had no idea. And it is a big hella emotional for people, you know. So I'll speak for Tenji and the people that Tenji was around. Fundamentally unprepared. So it's unprepared. I mean, I think I was dealing with so much of the emotional element of it, which was telling that I had not forecasted or scenario planned to what was required for me in that moment. Like I was kind of playing catch up. And I say this without like any, I think self-critique is important, and I'd say it lovingly to myself. I think it's like it's a political mistake and a failure to not assess the different possibilities and scenarios. So that's like the quick way of answering. I don't think that's what's going to happen in 2020. I think that we're I curse a lot, so forgive me, I'm from the Bronx, I just say. But I think we are prepared in a way in which that I think people are stepping into their leadership in this moment. That's my short.
I remember at this gathering that Barbara held, I can't remember if it was like before or after the election, but I remember you asked everybody to go around in the room and share like what they thought liberation ultimately looked like. And basically everybody in the room was like Black people creating our own institutions outside of the state, like not engaging the state. And like literally everybody said pretty much the same thing. And at the end you were like, I think you all have like internalized this neoliberal idea that like the state is inherently bad, and that you actually, like revolutionaries throughout all of history, have like fought for control over the state. And I think that was like really grounding for me and made me realize like we had this huge ambivalence to power. Like we didn't actually believe we could be in power. And so, yeah, I think we made a huge mistake. I think we pretty much sat out completely in 2016. I don't think we made a clear calculation between the difference between a Sanders versus a Clinton presidency, the difference between a Clinton versus a Trump presidency. And I think that had huge implications. I think, this was like a year after Mike Brown was killed. And so Black Lives Matter was kind of at its height. And I think if we had come out more forcefully or more like taken more leadership to say, hey, here's who we're voting for, I think we could have changed the outcome. And then I think the other thing we didn't do is I don't think we like made clear demands of the candidates. Like there was lots of bird dogging that was happening, and actually it's like so awesome that I think Black Lives Matter and the movement for Black Lives in many ways like popularized this idea of like putting politicians on the spot in very public ways. But our primary demand was like, say Black Lives Matter, which is like great, and like we could have had some more concrete things we were asking of them. And so I'm like excited this year because I think like to see how the Green New Deal within like 6 months has like become something that all the candidates are forced to respond to, and has like pushed the whole climate conversation to the left. Or like the, Medicare for all being like one of the main, conversations in the debate. The fact that they're talking about free college, like reparations. There's a huge opportunity for us to create some really clear demands from the Black left. And one of the things that BYP and Dream Defenders and Law for Black Lives and a bunch of organizations are coming around is around a campaign to call for the repeal and the replacement of the '94 crime bill, which Biden was an author of. And I think there's just, especially in this moment where Trump pushed his own form of criminal injustice reform, the First Step Act, like the Democrats need to take a strong stance on mass incarceration, otherwise we're going to get to 2020 and Trump's going to be like, see, I'm the only one who's done anything around criminalization. So I think that's both a stick to use against the Democrats to really force them to respond to our vision for what transformation of the system looks like in a real way, and for us to really organize candidates to take a strong stance on that.
I struggle with this question. I do remember all the many conversations and all the, I can endorse somebody, like what should, and this is just for me personally. I do not feel responsible for the shithole and the mess America has gotten themselves in. Real talk. I'm like, y'all did this. So I take no responsibility for it. However, as someone who is also very much interested in changing the world and like changing, what's happening in our communities, I think I remember grappling with, like talking to my family, my people about the election of like, we need to be voting for Hillary. Like I couldn't get that out my mouth. I could not say that. I'm like, because what does that look like as someone who has been saying to my people, how we need to be on the front lines organizing, these police are killing our folk, and all the things, and trying to explain them systemic racism, and they come to them and say, now vote for Hillary. Now obviously it's not that simple on its face, there's a longer conversation there, but it felt like a betrayal of everything that I remember being a teenager and folk and people talking about super predators. And I remember my friends and I being like, counselors would call us into different classrooms or whatever and try to we see y'all out here acting ridiculous. Whatever. So I just remember those times. And it felt like a betrayal to all I know in terms of my experience with, even from this point of view, it just felt like betrayal. And so it may have been very immature, but I didn't want her. I didn't want none of them cats. You know what I mean? Like real talk. And I think that's a challenge. It is about, so for me, because I don't like that we're in a position where we have to, every 4 years, who's going to be the one that surfaces up, that we have to choose from and go into I don't want that no more for our people. I'm like, oh, God, that's going to happen. But let's talk about in 10 years, we can say we have a strong political party that the folk who come through this is the folk who are on assignment from us. And other than that, I don't want to deal with the rest of that mess. But I know we have to, for the time being. But I don't want that to be our primary focus in our work. I want us to be on the long game of building something that we actually feel good about, that we actually like, that's our candidate. I don't care if they lose, instead those are our people. We sent them out there, and we got their back when they get in office to hold them accountable. We got their back when they don't win, but those are our people we believe in and can say it with our own conscience that those are the leaders we chose. I'm here for that. And in the meantime, we'll listen to, we'll do what must be done in order to prevent. Actually about this, I don't go down the line. But we'll do what must be done. But we have to have a different level of rigor and vision and desire about who we actually are putting our weight behind. That's what I want to see.
Okay, word. So this is my last question before we open it up for Q&A. Let's talk about wins. There were definitely some misassessments, some big things learned in the past 4 years. But if each of you could just speak a little bit about some things that we've won over that time, as well as, two-part question, as well as what are the things that we're trying to win in the next 4? And bonus question, if you want to add on to that, in the context of those things we're trying to win over the next 4 years, what are some things that folks in the room or on the live stream can do right now in service of those things that we want?
Can we just popcorn when we close that time? We just popcorn out. Well, y'all, I'm thinking reparations.
Okay, take up your mic.
Yes.
So friends, I'm thinking reparations. Now, what part of that, we win in those next 4 years, I think is, has yet to be seen. But there are some things that we should be that we should be winning over these next 4 years. Even in just the passing of House Bill 40, let's just start there. Can we agree that you need to research and get a number on the table? Just start somewhere. But I think we have to continue to move this conversation around reparations, not just for folk in the U.S., but I think for the U.S. to be accountable around across the diaspora, what has happened through the Atlantic slave trade. What can folks do? Read the new toolkit. Gather your people and read the new toolkit that was just put out by the Movement for Black Lives around what is reparations and how do you actually engage in a conversation around and understand it and get politicized around it. Oh, there's another piece around what have we won. I think that we have seen a lot of local wins on a local level and statewide. There's been some things we've been able to prevent. I would say specifically in Georgia, we were able to prevent, one of the things we know in the South is we move something very dope locally, everybody's excited, we win it, and then because all of these these good old boys still run the state house, they will come and take away our local wins, which is always weird, because I'm like, didn't y'all say that about small government? Why are you doing this? It's not our business. Anyway, but for 2 years now, we've been able to keep them and defeat them and keep them at bay as it relates to pretrial detention. In the city of Atlanta, we won policy that would minimize how people were being held in cages because they can't afford their bail. And for 2 years in a row now, we've seen the Georgia State Legislature continue to try to take that win from us. And that win has had significant impacts in terms of now the city of Atlanta jail is slated to be closed, and there's actually a grassroots task force that is working with the city to redesign what will be the new health and wellness center. And so the same place where damage has been caused by so many folks, has been caused on so many people's lives, that same place will be transformed into a place where our folks can get healing, get resources, and actually get some wellness. So that's really exciting. And I think one of the things that there has been a deep investment in leadership over the last 2 years. I think that folks are like, we can't play no games with that. Like we really, and we haven't, I think we have been very clear that just because somebody come out in the street don't make you a leader. Yeah. Yet. There shows potential for leadership. And so what it takes, the investment of time, capacity, resources into building our collective leadership and individuals inside of that is so critical. And I think that we have yet to see. We see it now, but we'll continue to see the manifestations of what it is meant to be serious and buckle down on building up new leaders. I know for some, the last 2 years we've started this leadership program. We've always done leadership development as part of the core tenets of our work, but we started a program called the Lord's Work, as in Audre Lorde. The Lord's Work, where we are building up the leadership of queer and trans Black people in the South. And a cohort of 50 was the first one, and this second one is about 40 or so. And so we just feel that there's a deep imperative and a desperate need for more folks to get trained up, to get skilled up, and slay. That is actually one of the things we say, to squat up, to skill up, and to slay. And so we're trying to give our folks the tools in order to be able to do that, because we need more leaders and more folks from our communities that are that are fighting for our lives. So for folks who are listening, join an organization, join somewhere where you can get skilled up. Join some. So there's on newground.org. That's a little weird, but hey.
Everything Mary said, and in particular, I was like really vibing what you were saying around just like governance, and that like we could have had our own candidate and we should be pushing towards that. And I think like one of the things I'm so excited about in this moment is like ALC and Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, and like, they're like so special and remarkable, but almost what's like the most remarkable thing to me about them is they're like not that remarkable. Like they're literally, I have like 40 friends who are just like them. And so like I feel like this is my first time I'm 31. This is the first time I've ever seeing myself, like seeing people like me who are in office, you know, day one get to Congress and talking about everything they're seeing, money in politics, all the lobbyists, like just being so transparent about what is happening and like really, really fighting back in such exciting ways. So that is inspiring like lots of young people in our organization to want to run for office, which is very exciting. And I'm like, we got to get towards governance. Everything that Mo is building with Working Families Party and the like actual like infrastructure we are building around a third party in this country is very exciting. Everybody should join Working Families Party. And then and song and movement, you know. And then I think in Florida, one thing that we're really like laser focused on, have been like super inspired by like the Close the Jail work in Atlanta and in New York, is around electing prosecutors on like a decarceration platform, like prosecutors who are actually interested in like chipping away at the system. And so, you know, especially with just passing Amendment 4, where, you know, 1 million people, hopefully the legislature is trying to attack it, are going to get their right to vote back. It is so exciting to have a very clear fight to pull them into. All of the state attorneys are up for re-election in 2020 in Florida. And so to have like 1 million people be able to be involved in an election that is like so clearly tied to why they were like locked up in the first place, I think there's a lot of potential there that I'm feeling really excited about and inspired. You know, like in Philadelphia, Larry Krasner, within his first few months in office, was able to decrease the jail population by 30%. That's really huge in terms of an electoral fight that has like real material conditions for people.
Yeah.
I feel like I don't have much to add, other than, so I agree with what was said around, there's like a popularization of demands and ideas, like reparations, we see divest, invest, that's really important. And I think that like something is shifted in which, like white supremacy is a term that's like used more now, that it was never used this, like pre-2014, 2013. So there's like an opening to name a thing, but I also think that there's more folks talking about and questioning capitalism than ever before. And even, I mean, as much as people want to critique like the way socialism is talked about, and socialism is still something that is becoming more a term used more and more, not just about people, you know, on television or fighting for office, but also amongst you know, everyday people. And so I think that's like really important, and there's like a huge opportunity there.
So now we'll open it up for some questions. Is there someone there who can help run the mic?
I can run around.
Thank you. Yes, and again, it's specifically questions.
I was coming at it as an elder just to know a couple of things that you may not know because you're not 65. So one is, I didn't hear anybody say anything about COINTELPRO, and if that's a consideration. I like the fact about the literacy. I think that's important. I was going to ask about civics component, but you already addressed that. Somebody talked about education. There's an old thing that said even chattel slaves knew not to give your children to people who didn't have the interests of your community. And just 2 papers, because you talk about how people have these generational plans. And I don't know if you're aware of Justice Powell's memorandum when he's an attorney for the Chamber of Commerce from 1971, and the Rockefeller Foundation's Crisis in Democracy in response to the rebellions of the 60s, and the difference between media and press. So if you want to I think the main thing is to understand, we send our children to schools and we're proud to go to Harvard and Yale, but we need to understand they don't prepare them to come back to our community. So I'm very proud of the fact that you go to these schools and you come back to our community.
The idea of a third party is very intriguing and exciting, but I wonder if there's a way to push for ranked choice voting or ranked voting in every state that would make it possible to vote for the party and idea that you prefer first. and still leave some opportunity if that doesn't work out.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. And we actually had our annual convening last week, and Maurice Mitchell and Steve Williams and Nalini Stamp gave this really powerful keynote together. And one of the things that they talked about was COINTELPRO and the fact that like the Black Power movement, it didn't just die, it was like defeated and attacked, and how all of our leaders ended up in prison or dead and like couldn't pass on the knowledge of what it takes to build an organization. And so how much work we're having to do in terms of just trying to figure out how to build an organization, because that knowledge wasn't passed down to us because our organizations were destroyed. And even like, you know, we talked about just like the rigor of what it means to be a revolutionary. I think someone said like, oh, we want to like end capitalism, but we can't show up to a meeting on time. And that's not like an individual deficit of us. That has like, we like literally have, that knowledge has not been passed down, and that's like a muscle we're having to rebuild. So yeah, so much of I think like the other just thing we're up against is like trying to build organizations that can sustain themselves, and you know, be able to create organizations that are able to be, you know, bring in leaders and sustain them and keep them in and put them on a pipeline. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. And then just the other piece around the Powell memo, I mean, neoliberalism was a reaction like to our movements gaining strength and working class people making gains, and the corporations literally got together and put together a 40-year plan around how to undo all of that. And so yeah, it's really important to understand that as neoliberalism as like payback from the rich and the corporate elite, because our movements were making gains. So thank you for bringing that historical context into the room.
I'm really interested in the intersection of big tech corporations and voter suppression, because we can send folks to the polls, but if their vote continues to be suppressed, like what we saw in Georgia, but also in the 2016 elections, not just the Russian bots, but like Facebook and Twitter and this continual like digital redlining that we see, and this like intentional racist algorithm. And there's no real intentionality or look in the movement at how some of these big tech corporations are really being used by the right to intentionally suppress the vote for Black people. And just love to get your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, I appreciate your question. I think these are the kinds of debates that we need to have with each other, and I think there's a range of sort of tactics that we could use in order to sort of challenge what we're up against, which is this like two-party duopoly. And so there's like people in this room, and I won't name them again, and there's others that I think could speak to this even deeper and more meaningfully than I can. But I think these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have when I think about sort of like long-term strategy. And then the other piece just around voter disenfranchisement and the way they're undermining our people's ability to access the sort of like political democratic project. We can't do get out the vote and not tackle that. And then also not tell our people about how they're limiting their ability to even access the right to vote. There's a sort of like such a deep and profound way they're disempowering our folks from the minute that they get there to various different ways that if we don't speak to it, then who will? So it's both how we tell our folks about how they're being either disenfranchised or locked out of the political project, but also we need to create strategies in addition to getting our people out that also addresses and tries to counter them.
I just real quick, I need to get more up on game on like how the big tech is, you know, where their hand is at in a lot of the voter suppression. Because it was interesting in Georgia when I remember the election day, and a lot of us was doing like poll watching and all sort of stuff. And some of it was just petty, like the way in which they were suppressing. You know what I mean? It's like, we didn't send the cords to the machines. We're like, come on, you know, like, and I think it was interesting just to like see how we knew like how they were moving in terms of Kemp not resigning. They had washed the poll, the voter rolls. We had, were testing out and experimental efforts of engaging folks in the absentee ballot in jails as a part of our, in alignment with our In Money Bail campaigns in Fulton County. And how, this folks on the local tip were just slack on the way in which they were willing to even allow people. And in my mind, I think this is Atlanta, Georgia. This is a home of civil rights movement, from some people. And to see that there was such a, for other black people in power, for other folk who could, easily give folks access to the ballot, was so, there's something about, how we are understanding who should be able to engage this thing that I think was really what blew my mind. The fact that obviously that Kemp did it, but then there was also folks on the local tip who were just like, no, you actually don't deserve to vote. You know what I mean? And so I think that in as much I know like big tech and a lot of these folks are playing key roles, some of it is like just everyday folk at the, who are just like, no, we don't want people to engage and don't think people should have a vote. You sitting pre-trial, you ain't been charged, regardless, even if it was, that they, people are making decisions on who can vote, or you can't come in because your kid is too loud, that sort of thing, And so some of it is just like, how do we understand what it means for everybody to vote? Everybody's voice is valuable in it. You know what I mean? Even if you don't have the, you may not be pulling strings from afar, but you could do something right then and there, like hold somebody, baby, while she go vote, sis. And so like there was something when I look at old footage, or at least maybe it's my imagination, where I would imagine when black folks would, were trying to go vote and encouraging each other to vote, and there was lives were at stake, and there was a honor about it, and there was just like a different sort of purpose, and being on purpose about it, and being able to support somebody else in that process to engage in it. Like there's something there too. If this is a tactic that we're going to engage in, I think we also have to work on how we not suppress each other just because our own blocks,
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up big tech, because I don't think our movement has actually fully grasped how much the impact it is having on the democratic process. But like before, politicians used to be able to be like, hey, we're going to target black youth age 18 to 35. Now they're collecting so much data on us that they're doing hyper propaganda targeted at individuals based on like 50 factors around them. Like, me. What are we going to do with this, like, mixed black girl from Oregon who shops at Zara but hates fast fashion? You know what I mean? Like, they're literally thinking of, like, hyper-targeted propaganda that speaks, to the very specifics of who we are as individuals. And, like, that's just incredibly scary in terms of our ability to actually win elections. And, like, Bannon has this company, Cambridge Analytica, who Trump hired in 2016. They've also consulted on right-wing elections all across the world around using like hyper-targeted data to move people to the right. And in Florida, actually, right before Clinton came, in a couple months before the election, Trump targeted Haitian people on Facebook around everything the Clinton Foundation had done in Haiti, which is like, it's important for that information to be out there because Clinton did that, but like the fact that it was coming from Trump as propaganda to get people to like not to vote for him is incredibly scary. And I think, one of the things that's scariest to me about tech is they get to like present themselves as like the future and like liberal, like, oh, we have hammocks in our office, therefore we're liberal, like the sharing economy, even though we're like exploiting workers like worse than like ever before. And so, yeah, tech cannot be neutral. Like tech cannot be seen as neutral. They're literally like responsible for surveilling people, for everything that's happening at the border wall right now, like Amazon, all of these companies are HP, all of these companies are caught up in all of that. And I think we really need to push back this idea that like tech is inherently like futuristic and socially good. And I think it's just, it's very dangerous what big tech is doing right now.
Hi. I found this conversation to be far more interesting and rigorous and analytical and intellectual than anything I have heard in the past 4 years on politics. I work in news, and so I also wonder how, and then this is
Say who you are.
If you want to.
My name is Jennifer. I work at a newspaper. And so I'm wondering, and this is, Rachel, you alluded to this earlier, the dominant narrative in the political industry is that like the milquetoast candidates and policies win, that you have to, like the candidate who looks and sounds closest to Trump is the one we need, right? No one knows about organizing. People are obsessed with these, problematic voter files, and so essentially, like this room sort of has converged on a series of truths. But how do you get the rest, everyone else, around, like, to sort of see what you see and sort of agree? Like, how do you chip away this narrative, this problematic narrative that is dominating the political conversation right now? It starts with op-eds.
Well, I think that for song, it's just going to require some old school, just bread and butter organizing, and I think it's going to require a block by block. This thing wasn't a block by block strategy. This thing wasn't created in like a day. This has been decades of work, and so I think we'd be remiss to think that we can shift people's opinion and hearts and minds, in a microwave. I wish we could. And I don't think that's what you're saying.
No, maybe if you're talking to someone who says like an old church lady who's like, I love Biden. I think these people are too. Like, what do you say to her?
To the old church lady, which is interesting.
Who loves Biden.
Yeah. Which is interesting.
How do you explain, like she's your audience?
I think someone who used to see, she's probably my audience. And I'm working on how to speak to that particular audience, because I'm a backslider, used to be saved, whatever, we can talk about it later. And so I'm like, that's the type of woman who helped raise me up, And so as someone, I would probably say to her, let's look at his deeds. Let's look at deeds and works. And let's look at the ways in which he has his policy, his opinions, etc. Do they actually, do they speak well of your children? Do they speak well of your people? Do they honor your foremothers and fathers? And I would ask her about her faith, and does her faith, does she have faith in young people? And is she willing to take action for the sake of young people? And does she believe in future generations and what we could do? And what was it like for her? And who does she believe in when she was younger? And what was her political disappointments? So I'm riffing here, friends, totally riffing. I don't know if that should have worked, but I don't know. But those are the sort of questions that, and ways in which I would want to engage in that conversation with her, So, yeah.
Next question. We have a couple of questions here too, if you want.
Okay. I thought you said okay. I appreciate what Mary said. I think about like the Bidens, the Obamas, and people are attached to like ideas, and like they've essentially told an effective story, like a narrative on who they are. And I think we need to popularize the kind of political homes that are like not just in the organization, but where we're in community, we're just talking about these people, like what they've done. And then also like they're talking about like what do we want and the possibility that things can be different. And at the end of the day, what we can't avoid is just the organizing, which is the ground game.
Like the ground game and creating enough spaces where people can have these kinds of conversations is the only way we do it. Simultaneously, but also because of the urgency of the moment, we also need an ear game. And so like cultural interventions, and we talk about op-ed, there are various ways in which can we make interventions to scale. So there's a story that Biden has effectively put out about who he is. What is our counter story? And that's part of the air game, while simultaneously still the ground game. So people need to be held throughout their political journey in terms of their analysis on who these people are.
Great.
I just have one quick Biden talking point. I don't want to go into the question. But people think, people associate Biden with Obama, the first black president, but they chose Biden precisely because he was the opposite of Obama. Obama was presenting this much more progressive vision of the country, and Biden was like a conservative Democrat, white guy from the Midwest who partnered with white supremacists. So right, yeah, so that's why they chose him, because he's the opposite of Obama and they were trying to put the ticket together. So that's just usually my Biden talking point. Works sometimes.
Because this is like what I learned as a young organizer during the Obama. I was like, Obama. We can't organize our people like they're wrong. We can't use that approach. I think that's a flawed approach of your assessment. You're just wrong on this. I think we need to create a different kind of way of organizing our people away from the Bidens and the others.
I was going to say, Asha, since we have around 10 minutes, do you want to take all the questions and then stack?
Okay, first of all, thank you all for the incredible work you're doing on the ground and for your critical thinking and vision. So I'm going to ask you a question. Yeah. You make me feel very hopeful. So I'm going to ask you a question that I really haven't been able to answer myself for the last 5 or 6 decades. So I want to make it easy for you. You've talked a lot about the long view, Mary, all of you in different ways, and doing each doing incredible strategic work. But what about that long view? And what about the overall strategy of this left movement, social justice movement that we all long for? Are you, in your organizations, able to work with other organizations right now to develop that long view in any real way? Or if not, what do you think needs to happen so that that could happen? A cohesive strategy, long-term strategy for social justice, feminism, I would add.
So we're going to take a few more questions.
So this is, I think, a somewhat related question. My name is Warren Simmons, and I spend a lot of time in the world of philanthropy. So you do incredible, amazing work as individuals and organizations on a pittance of the resources that go to organizations on the right. If we don't change that, we're always pushing mountains and trying to create social justice. So what are your thoughts about how we create a new philanthropy or a new funding platform so that you and we get the resources we need to do this difficult work?
Thank you so much for all the information provided. Thank you.
Well, I just wanted to say, to follow up behind Ms. Mary, that we have to go block by block, and we cannot be afraid of each other. And I find that in my community, people do not want to talk to this one, or this person is young and I'm young, he's into this and I'm not going to speak to them. We have a responsibility, all of us here, to talk to everyone and express what it is that we know. And I think this lady in front right here, I didn't catch her name, but you were talking about how you convince people. And I think that because I read so much and I know things that maybe other people don't have time, they got children, they got all sorts of stuff. So I'm imparting that information to them. My coworker here, we came down
And the job that she does and the job that I do, we reach out to people who do this on our job as well. We may not get a raise, but people have learned and have grown from what we have said. So I just wanted to throw that out as a work ethic for all of us.
So I'll just take the last one and then.
Well, first of all, I just want to say that the advice from the panelists who claim to be a backslider to the church leaders, spot on, really. My question is, what do you say to a backsliding church?
In terms of social justice.
A lot of questions.
Okay. All right. Let's just dig it on in.
Dig it on in.
How do we find when our opposition is getting a lot more funding for that? How do we change that, or what else? And then what do you say?
All right, the first one, I'll just touch on these a little bit, just some initial thoughts. I think that, I feel like if real talk, if the work that we did and the conversations and scheming that we did after 10 p.m. with brown liquor for Alzheimer's was funded, because that's where the magic happens, real talk. And it doesn't get formalized. So I think we've had enough conversations, to actually we have talked about it, we have named it. So, but real serious, I think that there has to be, we have to be able to do more long-term planning around hey y'all, in one more year, we all gonna get together. Come with your best thinking, come with your, priorities, and let's hammer this out for a week or two. Back in the day, folks would go up to Highlander, and be able to spend days, months together, dreaming and scheming. And we are in a climate where that does not happen anymore. To spend a weekend is trying to get folks together for 2 days is tough. So I think we need a longer term timeline in terms of how we plan it, and then the resources to be able to do it. We need strong facilitation. And I think that we need to be able to have a regularly scheduled time to evaluate and to assess and to make shifts based on the shifting climate. So that's that first part. How do we create a new philanthropy? I think we have to change the dynamics of philanthropy. My God. Just give us the resources. Just give it to us. Just give grassroots organizations, folks who are in philanthropy need to just say, hey, these are the folks who are on fund, okay, and just give the resources. Unrestricted, multi-year. Not even just give it to us, because if you got it for multi-year, just give it to us right away, so then we ain't got to keep coming to you after a year. Because it doesn't change the power relationship. You know what I mean? And it doesn't shift that. And so I think that there has to be a level of political education that happens amongst folks who are in philanthropy. And we know that there are folk inside of philanthropy who are people who are there on assignment. We honor you and your work that you're doing for doing that work. And at the same time, I think that there's opportunity we need to be able to say, this is what we want to do. This is our long-term work. And if you want to be a part of this and contribute resources, you actually have to prove to us why we should let you in on this thing. And it should be a different flip. So we should flip it a little bit more. But anyway, I think it should be less restricted. And I think we have to really expose how much money we're talking about here. Real talk, because most graduate folks are like, oh my God, we got $20,000. We turn. You know what I mean? And some people are baby always is honey, these is crumbs compared to what we're really talking about. So we also need to be just real clear about how much coin we actually talking about. You know what I mean? Because what we think is scale is not really scale. We could really do some things if we had the resources. And on this last one, I would join the church. I would have to join a church, because I think it would be unprincipled for me to be hey, your church is shabby, without me actually investing my time, talent, or time to be able to make an assessment, you know what I mean, and actually start organizing folk from the inside. So I would do that, join it.
I remember when I got my first $20,000. That's how.
that I did sign. Okay. So I think I can comment probably when my brain is limited right now around the long view piece. Let me preface this by saying I'm actually I have never been more hopeful in us creating for this long-term meta vision. I feel it everywhere I go, both in the US, but also really globally, that we're getting closer to choosing it and committing to it. I think we have to do a couple things though in order to make it possible. One, I feel like the hyper-professionalization of movement work has had us create timelines in a grant cycle period, year to year, month to month, and it's limited our imagination and our political responsibility to create long-term strategies and long-term vision, but also limited our imagination a little bit. And I think that we have a moment where we can break out of that mentally and begin to move towards sort of bold transformative vision. The last piece is any place where we agree to create a multi-decade strategy that we're going to move together, it's going to have to be some kind of political home infrastructure, vehicle, whatever you call it, where we're essentially agreeing to engage in debate and struggle together.
Yes.
And we have to choose that. And we often say, am I the right person? Or who says that you're the right person? We also have to break out of that as well. We have to choose that we wanted together to create the kind of political vehicle that can hold that level of debate. And it cannot just be the US, it has to be global.
Yeah.
I feel I was looking at my notebook, I was in Brazil, and we were talking about we need a new global political formation for us so that we can cry, scream, yell, and then at the end of the day still choose each other. And then that way we can develop sort of a 50 or 100-year strategy so the next generation of organizers has something to inherit. And we can say, this is how far we took it, now it's your turn. And I think that's where we're at.
Yeah, I love what you said around spaces to hold debate, because I think honestly that's one of the things that our movement sometimes lacks. Where, I think we just expect, if people don't agree with us, we just, the whole cancel culture, I'm done with you, you've got a fucked up politic. And I think we need to figure out how to actually have more patience for each other and begin to struggle with one another. And I think, one thing that, over the last year, Dream Defenders has been trying to work with the March for Our Lives kids, because, they literally are in South Florida, down the street from us. And I think there's times in that relationship where we have been totally frustrated and have been committed to organizing them, because we know if we're not organizing them, some DC white corporate think tank is organizing them, literally. And so, I think just having patience for the fact that they are 16, 17-year-old kids from the suburbs, and that they're not gonna, nobody is born with a politic, that is developed over time. And it's really cool because we met with them a couple weeks ago and they were yeah, now we know it's not just about school shootings, but it's about gun violence more broadly. And then, we're even seeing that it's actually not just about gun violence, it's about everything that's happening at the border. And the fact that we spend more money on war than we do on education. So to actually see that the politics is developing is so exciting. And I think if you're just talking to people who think exactly like you do, you're not organizing, and we're not going to be able to actually make that long-term vision happen.
Absolutely.
We have to be working together across different.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody. I think we are at time. Just briefly, I want to say,
go ahead.
Thank you to Barbara, Kathy, Jocelyn, Scholars for Social Justice. To my comrades on the panel. It's been a minute since I've been around y'all, so this is great. And to everyone who contributed, great questions to the conversation. There is, I think, a reception, so please, talk to these folks. I learn something every time I do.
Turn it to Jocelyn.
And give it up for Asha, y'all.
Develop this incredible conversation. I don't think this is on. I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, just
because
can I
I'm
see that?
old. And showing these things.
That's not floating here.
And I have teenagers too, so I don't get to learn these things, right? They just take it from me. So I just want to say that that, you know, I'm really not an optimistic person. I'm really kind of pessimist, realist kind of person. But this panel actually helps me develop the patience. Thank you, Rachel. It really helps me develop the hope. Thank you, Tenji. And it also makes me think of the critical role of brown liquor in conversation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the fact that we're going to have a little bit of a reception here. I think we have a taste